How do you get the ball past the blooming... There's no way that that is going to go in. Okay, so this is how you get at the fuel tank sender on the Fiat Ducato 2001. This is actually Peugeot Boxer 1.9 diesel. First off, of course, actually what you've got to do is take out a few screws here, then you can just get that up enough, get the edge of this carpet up. First thing I've done is cut the carpet here. And then you can get to this, and then I don't know what's under here because I've never done it before. Then you've got this. I'm hoping this comes out. I suppose it's probably soundproofing. Yeah, that comes up. Then there's another cover. So 4 screws in that. So I'm going to take out these 4 screws and hopefully this is going to lift out. I've no idea really because I can't find any information online. Okay, so lift that out and you've actually got access to the top of the tank. Incidentally, I didn't mention it at the start, I just ran out of fuel today because my fuel gauge has become very unreliable. It's either showing empty when there's 3 gallons in it, or it's showing it's still got some when not. So looking at this, it is possible to actually get to the sender unit and replace it if necessary without taking the tank out, which is what I was trying to avoid. So I'm going to do the next bit without showing you, but I'm going to pull off this connector, clean all the terminals on it, see if that makes any difference to my fuel gauge on the panel. And next step will either be to replace the sender, which is most likely the culprit, or from what I've read online, might be the gauge on the panel. I think it's more likely this, that's the part that's more liable to degrade. So I'll come back to you once I've actually sorted something out. Don't go away. Okay, so here's a closer up look of what you've got in here. I don't know how you get those off. Here's the connector to the sender. First thing I'm going to do is pull the plug out of the socket there, give it a squirt with some switch cleaner, in and out a few times, and see if that's made any difference, because that's the simple thing to do. If it doesn't, well, I'll see what happens when I pull it out on the fuel gauge. If the fuel gauge goes down to 0, I'd say that's an indication the fuel gauge is working. Right, well, I've given those a squirt. I doubt very much it's these connections. I should think it's more likely the sender. Right, well, here is the new fuel gauge sender, just arrived by DHL from Italy. I couldn't find one in the UK. And basically what this is, you've got a float here and you've got a variable resistance here. So when the level goes up and down, the resistance changes, which obviously then shows on the fuel gauge as how much is in the tank. If I put a test meter on here, from the slider, which is that one, to that one, you should be able to see it go up and down on the resistance scale. If I put that there, just like that, so at least I know it's working. Right, I'm going to go and try and fit it. Here we go, let's give it a shot. So what I'm going to do first, just to test that this is going to work okay, I'm going to unplug this, just to make sure it's going to fit. I'm going to plug in the new sender. There's a slot that side, it should go. Right, it goes once you get it the right way around. So what I'm going to do is put the ignition key in now and move the float and see if the gauge goes up and down. Right, well, I just gave it one more test and I have learned something. It's no good trying to move this and expecting the gauge to move. The gauge takes an instantaneous reading when you turn it on. So if I put it down there, turn the ignition on, it's showing almost empty. If I put it about halfway, turn it on, sorry, that's my dash cam, put it on halfway, it's showing half full. Turn the ignition off, put it up there, turn it on, right to the top, it's showing full. It does work. But basically it just goes to show you can't rely on tests to work the way you think they might work. I assumed the gauge would be analog, in other words going up and down uniformly as this goes up and down, but in fact it's not the way it works. Right, now just wish me luck. I'm not sure how these connectors come off. I can't find any info online. Sorry if you can't see that. It's very difficult to actually video this. I think these connectors just slide off, but I'm not sure. But I've got to give it a go. So I'll be back in a bit once I've done that. Take out the, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 little, take off the 6 nuts under there and lift it out. Well, I don't know if you can see this. The first connector slid off quite nice and easily. Second one doesn't want to push back. I think probably the fuel line's stopping it. So what I'm going to have to do is undo the 6 nuts, lift it, and hopefully I'll be able to slide it off then. And it's hard to work now because I've got diesel on my fingers and this is all slippy slidey. So you're probably better off undoing those before you actually take these off. But you live and learn when you do these kind of jobs. Hopefully I won't ever do it again. Right, well, 6 nuts taken off very carefully because I didn't want to drop any on top of the tank. And it's a bit of a fiddle to pull it up. But in fact now I've got some room to slide off this connector. Yep. Slide off that connector. And hopefully this will lift out. Why won't it come? Oh, it's the float that stops it. It's the float. It's obviously got to be wiggled in a certain way. Didn't anticipate this problem. Oh, there's the float. I can see it now. Yeah, you got to get it. You've got to get it to the side so that you can wiggle it sideways. Right. So there's the old one. In with the new one. Obviously I'm going to get a new gasket with it too. Put the new gasket on. That might help. Yeah, that's going to do it, I think. Oh. Bit of help with a screwdriver. Okay. Even better, I've made a tool with a bit of wire. If I can get these underneath. Yeah, that should do it. There you go. Tool with a bit of wire. Yeah, that's definitely the way to go. Bit of wire underneath. One to go. Well, considering that's been on there 20 years, that's not in bad shape, is it? Right, new gasket. Oh, actually, the new gasket is on it. You've got to put it in with the gasket on. So last look at it, everything looks fine. Yep, everything looks good to me. Line up the gasket with the holes. I'll take off these protective covers. No, I'll leave them on to the last. Don't want to get any dirt in there. Line up the gasket with the holes. Yep. And let's hope that goes in. How do you get that in? How do you get the ball past the how do you get the ball past the blooming... Ah, you see, you don't anticipate these things, do you? There's no way that's going to squeeze in with the pipe. There's no way that that is going to go in. Oh yes, it just about does. Oh, yes it does. Whoa, man. That is a tight fit. And now this tag, that tag is binding. There's a little tag, electrical tag here that is binding. we can get it in. What a wiggle, man. What a wiggle. Right, pipes on. Start with this one. That's the tight one. Pipes are on, yeah. Gasket on. Poor, what a job, man. Gasket on. I've got one hole on. Yep, 2 holes. 3, 4, 5, 6. Wish they'd made those holes a little bit bigger. Just a fraction. Got to make sure you don't tuck the wire in that too, that doesn't help. Right. Now. Right, well, I turned on the fuel gauge on the motor up there and it is reading. Otherwise I might as well have just given it up. I wondered if I damaged it trying to jam it in there, and with a bit of help from this pushing down I've managed to get the tops of the nuts showing. So time to put the nuts back on, tighten up against the gasket. Right, Houston, we have a problem. The fuel gauge is now showing full and I have no idea why. Doesn't make sense at all. Either something is jammed up now inside and jamming the float high, but it wasn't before, so I've unplugged it. I'll turn it on again, see what it reads. Right, fuel gauge is reading 0. Let's see if it's reset it now. If I plug back in and turn back on, see what I get, and it is still showing full, so there's little point in me carrying on. I'm going to try and pull it up again and see what's gone wrong here. I suspect something is shorting those connectors there, so I think I'm going to have to pull it out, bend the connectors in a bit. If they short on the side of the tank, it's going to make it read full. That might be the problem. Right, well, the lesson obviously is to check it as you go. Right, so I've lifted it out now, so the float is obviously down. I can see it's down. It's not jammed up. So let's just try with it clear of anything so it's not shorting. Let's just see what it's reading now. Makes sense to plug it in first, doesn't it? Because it wasn't reading anything. Let's plug it in. Got it the right way. Wish me luck. This is getting beyond a joke. Right, make sure it's not shorting on anything. Float is in the down position. Right, float is in the down and it's reading empty, so I'll just slip it in a little bit so that it's actually slightly floating. If I can put it in so it's not shorting anything. This is the crappiest design I've ever seen. The actual tags are exposed here, so that it makes it very difficult to actually get in. All they needed to do was bend them sideways slightly. Let's try it there, with that resting on the, that's resting on the rubber, so it shouldn't be shorting anything. Let's see what that reads. And sure enough, it's come up off empty, so it does appear to be working. So I'm going to have a little go at bending this tag, or in fact I don't think it's that tag that's the problem, it's the tags at the top, because once it's actually in, that tag's not actually contacting anything. I'm going to have a little go at bending those tags so that they don't contact the metal around the edge. Right, well, I didn't want to risk bending it, so I've actually snibbed a little bit off the edge, which might make it go in a bit easier. Because it is one hell of a horrible tight fit. I think I'm going to have to risk bending it a little bit. Right, well, with a bit of adjustment of those pins so that it went in a bit easier, and I bent these ones downwards so they're not jamming up against the metal. I'm hoping, and I've just done a check, the fuel gauge is actually reading properly, about halfway, which is what it is at the moment. So I'm hoping, get these back on. Yep, one. Right, both of those back on. Double check again that it's all working. Oh, don't forget there's a little bracket that goes there that this pushes onto. So don't forget to put that on, that holds it in place. That little thing, oh, where is it? There it is. So I'll just check the fuel gauge again. Yep, showing about a quarter full, which is kind of what I'd expect. So I'm going to try again to get this down. I think perhaps the reason that it wasn't going was the fact that it was trapping those connectors from that, because it's gone right down now. It was trapping those connectors against the metal at the edge, shorting against the tank. So now I can actually see the tops of all those threads. I will check the fuel gauge again. Yes, and it's reading closer to halfway now. It's actually inserted. So I'm going to get these little nuts back on, put the covers back on, clip that back into position, just make sure it's pushed in properly before I... It's reading anyway, so it must be alright. Put it all back together, and hopefully that is sorted now. Hooray! And the moral of the story is, the part of the job that you think is going to be simple is often the worst. But now I know the trick with this. God knows how you're supposed, I don't know how you're supposed to get that in with the float on it. But as you saw, it did go in, but boy, I mean, the old one coming out was difficult anyway, but getting that one with the round float on in, I don't know how it went in. Just sheer brute force, really. So nuts are going back on. Obviously don't over tighten them. Just partially tighten opposite sides before giving it a final tighten. So the way I'm going to judge this is by how much thread there is sticking out on each one. I mean, it's a rubber gasket, so it's going to compress. It doesn't need to be mega tight, I'm thinking. That's feeling about as far as it wants to go. opposites. Looking at it, I can see the gaskets compressed nicely. Just going to go and check that fuel gauge again. And yes, it's reading 1/3 full. So I'll stick that on there. Right, so that's it, back together. Just put the covers back on. I've checked the fuel gauge again for the 100th time. Everything's working happily. So that should be good for another 20 years. Anyway, I hope you found it useful. Give it a thumbs up if you have. I couldn't give it a thumbs up. I can't even get the thumb in the right angle here. Give it, oh, that's a thumbs down. I couldn't find any really good information about fitting one of these in a 2001 Peugeot Boxer 1.9 diesel. But as you saw at the start, the cover's on the passenger side in the footwell. If you're a bit more careful, you probably wouldn't have to wreck the carpet getting it out. And with a bit of fiddling and searching, you can actually replace the sender. So that's it for now. Oh, check out some of the other stuff on my channel. There's some flying, sailing, wildlife, paragliding, paramotoring, loads of action camera tests. Oh, radio control models. Yeah, there must be something there to keep you amused. But that's it for now. Stay safe. Hopefully I'll catch you all again soon. Bye for now.